Welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Turn the Page, the official podcast of Syosset Public Library. I'm here today with the author of a really lovely and funny and moving and thoughtful collection of comics. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Yes, I am Barbara Brandon-Croft. My book is Where I'm Coming From, and it is a collection of my years of being syndicated, which was like 14 years. Yeah.
It's such a fascinating collection, and it covers so much time and so much history, and there's so much to discuss. And I'm wondering, before we get into the book itself, if you could talk a little bit about your journey into cartooning in comics, because I've read that your father was also a comics creator and that you sort of learned a lot of the craft from him. So I'm wondering if you could talk about like what drew you to pursuing the same arts, and how did you find your way into this comic strip?
Okay, yes. So, yes, my dad was one of the pioneer Black cartoonists. There were three that came into play into the mainstream press in the late 60s. My dad had a Brumsick, Brandon Jr., had a comic strip called Luther, started out in Newsday, Long Island Newsday, and also Ted Shearer had Quincy, and Maury Turner had Wee Pals. So he was part of that crew. But my dad was this cartoonist. He didn't just do Luther. He did many other cartoons and drawings. So my whole life, and he was an animator when he had a 9 to 5. So his whole, as long as I knew him, he was drawing, and he was always in our home. And early on, he drew in the living room, small house, center of the house, dining room table. That's where he was drawing. He later we had a basement. He built a room for his studio. As for me, I did not know I was going to be a cartoonist. I had no idea what I was going to be. And I was all over the place. I knew I wanted to study art. I had a particular talent, I was told, and I felt. And so I studied art. I went to Syracuse VPA, Visual and Performing Arts School. And when I came back, I didn't know what I was going to do. Cartooning was not on my brain. I was like, I'll be a fashion designer. I'll be a fashion illustrator. I was everywhere. Ended up getting a job as a fashion writer and illustrator because they said they would take trainees. I said, that's me. I got that job. But it wasn't until I tried to, I know, my dad got a letter from the Detroit Free Press saying, we are trying to get our comic pages to reflect our audience, because we're talking Detroit, and I have family in Detroit. We're talking Detroit, and so they asked my dad, did he know of any other Black cartoonists? And I had I think I get the story kind of confused, but it's all in my book, the right order. But that is how I got into it. I had created this. I tried to get a job at a magazine, a Black woman's magazine, and the editor-in-chief there said, "You're kind of funny. You draw. Can you do a comic strip?" And that's when like the light bulb went over my head. It was like, hey, seen it done. My dad's done it. If he can do it, I can do it. How arrogant. I was like, if he can do it, I can do it. So I came up with an idea, and my dad was like, go downstairs, see what you can come up with. So I was down there for like weeks. I came up to eat. No, I was down there for a long time. And I came up with this idea. I thought it would be interesting again, it was for a Black women's magazine. I thought it would be interesting to have a Black woman speaking to the audience. Just their heads. It was just their heads to start with. And I showed it to the editor-in-chief there. Her name is Marie Brown. She's now a literary agent, an iconic literary agent. And she said, I like this, can you come up with more? We'll see how we can pace it in the magazine. And, me who's, I've been called lazy, but I was thinking, if it's for a magazine, that's 12 strips, 12 strips a year. I can do that. So I came down and I came up with more. I was happy with them. I called to say I have the other strips for you. And the person on the phone is like, she can't come to the phone. I was like, but she's expecting me, it's like, and they said, I guess you didn't hear, the magazine folded. I was like, what?
Oh.
So this is 1982.
Mm.
Could be 83. I'm a fact checker in my other life, and I'm not quite sure. It's 82 or 83. And I was devastated. I was like, wow, that stings. I didn't think I wanted to be a cartoonist. Now that's what I want to be. So the only other Black magazine, woman magazine I knew was Essence, of course. And I sent it to Essence, and I got a favorable reaction to it, but they also didn't think it fit their editorial landscape. And they were like, well, you're not making it as a cartoonist. What do you do? I was like, all right, fashion. I'm a reporter for Retail News Bureau. And it just so happened that their fashion and beauty writer was pregnant and getting ready to go on maternity leave. And they didn't have anybody. They asked me to take an editorial test. I took it. I got the gig. And then my dad got the letter from Marty saying, do you know of any Black cartoonists? And my dad said to me, are you going to talk about being a cartoonist, or are you going to actually be one? And I was like, I'm going to be one. And I sent those very same strips to Detroit, and Detroit loved them off the bat. I was like, wow. And they're like, let's start it. And I was published in Detroit Free Press in 1989. Yeah.
It's so interesting how it came about, and it's twisty turny journey.
Yes.
Like it was very
I can't even keep it straight.
Yeah. But that's understandable. Like it took a while to sort of but I'm so glad that it did, because it's so interesting. And the women who populate the strip are all so lovable, even when they kind of get on each other's nerves, and like I wonder if you could talk a little bit about where the characters come from, because I read that some are based on your friends, and I'm wondering, is that like, is there a one-to-one correspondence between your friends and the characters, or is it more like little bits and pieces of your friends kind of make their way into them? Like, can you talk about them a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So my initial idea, again, was for a magazine. It was going to be 12. It was going to be a different woman each time. They weren't going to have names, they were just going to be women talking. And then when I got Detroit, and then I tried to get a syndicate, the syndicates were like, that's not going to work. You have to, well, they all rejected me anyway, but Universal Press didn't reject me, but they said, you have to, you can't do a different person every time you do it. So I was like, and I had realized that I'd started using the same character for same kind of, there was the same theme in that one particular character. So for instance, Lakeisha, who's, got the, stylized dreads, whenever I used her, whenever I wanted to express something about social justice, it would be Lakeisha talking. So I was realizing that I was already creating characters. And then when I was told, actually they wanted, not Universal Press was very open, but the other one's like, you can't do just women and different women. You need to focus in on one woman, and have her so-and-so and her cast of friends, that kind of thing. And it's like, that didn't fit right to me. So, and Universal, bless them, Lee Salem, bless him and rest in peace, was very open to their artists and their artist vision. And he would suggest changes, but he wouldn't, put his foot down and say, this is what you have to do in order to get things going. So all the way to your question. And that is that, so these characters, there is no direct one-on-one correlation to my friends or me. But there is a bit of me in every character, and there's a bit of my friends in every character. I've had I have good friends. I have friends for a long time. My oldest friend that I've known for more than 60 years. I mean, we were friends as toddlers. I know people from kindergarten. I know people from high school. I know people from college. All the places that I stopped in life. I've made some really good friends. And so they've been very helpful in, just our dialogue, just the things that we talked about, things we laugh about, things that we find funny or ridiculous or I find fun. It's mostly what I find funny and ridiculous that I put down on paper, but it is triggered by my conversations with my friends and my very great ability to eavesdrop. When I listen, I eavesdrop all the time. It's like, did that person just say that? It just, and I write it down, and I end up being able to use it at some point.
That's so interesting because it really like the comic feels so intimate, like when you're reading it, because the characters are addressing you directly, like they're looking at each other, but they're also looking at you, and you feel like you're part of the conversation. But also it does sometimes have that feeling of like, but also maybe this is a conversation happening next to me at a table at a crowded restaurant that I'm like, ooh, that sounds very interesting, like
I'm so glad you picked that up. That's because that's exactly what it is. But I'll say Jules Pfeiffer, loved how, he did loved Jules Pfeiffer, and he had a wide range of ways of communicating, but I loved when he had his characters talk directly to the reader, and which is, I bit that, I was like, I'm going to use that. And I also used his size, because the size was different than what other newspapers do and comics do, which was another reason the syndicate said it's never going to work. Thank goodness for you, Universal Press and Lee Salem. That's all I can say. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I would love for you to talk a little bit more about why you did pick the style that you did, because something that I thought was very interesting was that there was a point at which it was suggested that you do depict the women's bodies, and that you
Put them in fire bins.
yes, pretty intentionally did not want to. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the decision, because I think it is also part of what like makes it feel so intimate in a way, because you're focused on the conversation.
Yes. I'm glad you see it that way, because that is definitely intended. I decided and was told you got to put them in, you have to have bodies, you have to put them in environments. It's like, no, I want these women to be talking to the reader. I want them in their faces, eye to eye, and intimate, and I typically, like if you look at say comic books, or you have these women that are superheroes, tiny waists and beautiful flowing hair and whatever is supposed to be our idea of what beauty is. And I didn't appreciate that, and I didn't like that being put on women all the time. And I didn't, I didn't want women to be thought of as objects, or as part of their in pieces, like, oh, I have to show cleavage to sell beer, of course. It's like, it's not necessary. It's just look in my eyes, listen to what I'm saying, understand what I'm feeling by my expressions. And I ended up extending, not just using faces, but using hands to be more expressive. And clearly I talk with my hands. And so that was an easy, way to appease, some people who thought it needed more than just these oval or heart shape or round shaped heads. Yeah. Yeah.
I really love that. Yeah, and it's such a pleasure to read, because it does have this just very like as I said, like it feels so comfy and cozy, and like the relationships are all very lived in, but you also get to see the relationships like grow over time and them develop as characters or as people, and as mothers, like because like the mother-daughter relationship is also very like sweet and funny. And so like when you started to write these characters, did you always see their journeys, or did they sort of like reveal themselves to you as you were writing it?
Uh, I would say
Oh.
as I was growing and becoming and all of that, I could get a little deeper with my characters, because you do definitely use part of yourself. And with Lydia, who had the baby, um, I had friends who were having babies, married and unmarried, um, and I was a part of their lives, and I felt like I knew. I thought I knew what it was motherhood was about, and I would, I could talk about this and but once, so my son was born in 1998. So once I had a kid, and I realized that I didn't know everything I thought I knew. I didn't know. It's like I didn't know how life altering it was. I didn't know how um, enriching it was. I didn't realize how much I was going to learn from this new person, Um, and so I had the baby grow. Usually doesn't happen in comics. They usually you stay the same age all the way through, and the women are the same age. But the baby started growing up, and up into being a toddler, and I felt safe with using a body on her because she was a kid.
Yeah.
That's it's still just it's part of her face. It's part of her expression. It's only when you get older that you start worrying about diets and looking a certain way and all that stuff that's put on us to think
Mhm.
about what beauty is. So that was fun, and it was and it was part of me growing, that
Mm.
that my characters grew and got a little deeper and stuff.
Mm.
So
That strikes me as like the benefit of a kind of long-term project like this, because you really do get to like you see the artist and the characters grow together, and that can just be such a really, I think, rewarding thing to watch over a long period of time.
yeah.
Um, I had a question about the way that the comic talks about like current events at the time and responds to things that were going on in the world. And the comic strikes a really interesting balance because some of it feels so specific to its time, by referencing specific things like, HIV and public health and the Clarence Thomas hearings and all this different stuff. So it feels like really on the pulse. But there's also times where it feels very prescient because things that the characters are talking about, we're still talking about, and like we haven't moved all that far on so many of them, like the police brutality and systemic injustice and inequality. And I'm wondering, like, did you anticipate at the time that both, because there's an interesting balance of like some things have changed a lot and some things haven't changed at all, and like how like how did you I'm trying to think how to phrase the question, but like were you surprised at all by like how relevant some bits of it still are?
um Not exactly. I wasn't. I'm not that. And again, my dad was a cartoonist. So what I knew while I was doing it, that some things that I was talking about were things that he was talking about in the 60s. So but if you attach it to current events, like you pointed out, Rodney King, I had to talk about that. There were some very specific things that we didn't include in the book, you know, um, and now I'm not going to be able to remember the basketball player's name, but he wouldn't stand for the when they played the national anthem
Oh, yes.
long before Kaepernick. But and I'm not saying it's, I'm saying that this is what happens. And even when I was going back through strips, I saw this person's name, Abdul something, I can't remember. Um, and I had to look him up because I couldn't remember what I was like, what am I talking about? And I looked it up and I was like, right, it's like putting the news to the strip. Sometimes you don't know. But also to your point of did you know then if it was still, would it have this kind of play, where you can see that it's a repeated theme and that we haven't gotten that far. And it was pretty clear to me that I was talking about things that were current events, but I knew that it had happened already, and when I realized, like, there's one strip that I say that I started with in the new year. It's like, it's all these things about how it's a new year, what's great and what's not so great, um, what's exciting, but is also upsetting, what is, those kind of things,
Mm.
is that there can still be a first Black something in the year 1991. I did that every time there was 10 years later, I did the same exact strip. And then I did an exhibit with my dad, and he had that same strip way back when. Yeah. Yeah. So to that point, yeah. And also, I'm just going to add that more recently we did an exhibit called Still, Racism in America. And it was my dad's work and my work. And it started at a gallery in Manhattan. Tara Nakashima Donahue, her family had a gallery in New York, and she's the one who encouraged me to do this. And I said, I see this Still book. We could do it with my dad and my stuff. And she's like, we could make that an exhibit. I was like, what? And we did, and it opened in New York, and it was, we were so proud of it. I was beyond proud of it. And then the shutdown, COVID shut everything down. So that was the end of it. But the Billy Ironman picked it up, and so it had a run there. So yeah, that's part of, I just say all that because you brought up Still, and I was like, that's actually the name of the exhibit. Yeah. and
Wow.
for that very reason. Yeah.
Wow, that is so, so fascinating. And yes, like that makes so much sense, and it kind of reminds me of a way like this is a total tangent and I hope you forgive me for it.
That's fun.
But recently I was watching the like a special edition of Do the Right Thing, and like Spike Lee has a video introduction to it, and it's not a new one. Like he didn't film it for the new edition. He filmed it 10 years before, and he was like, this is the last time I'm going to talk about this like until something changes, and there is that feeling, yes, of like, yeah, still still.
It's
So
still, it's exactly what it is. And that makes me think, if I wrote an essay about how, having a young Black boy as as your son, and I did an essay about it, and talked about how, and this is probably when Trayvon Martin, got in, because my son was very young, and I was like, when you start talking about this kind of thing to your little one, that was the whole basis of the essay. I revised that essay like 3 times. Um, it was at the time, I did it for parents.com, for parents.com, yeah. But then I had to revise it because it kept happening. This young kid gets killed for no good reason, unarmed, and so as part of our the American experience.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's is a testament, I think, to like the particular historical moment that we're in, that like so much of it does still feel so intensely relevant. But at the same time, there is a lot of it that also feels like very universal in terms of like the women's like struggles between each other, but also like within themselves. Like a lot of them deal with like issues of insecurity and their place in the world. And it like manages to feel so at once like that balance of like culturally specific and grounded and representative with like universality and relatability. Like how do you approach like that sort of that balancing act?
Yeah, I think it helps to have so many characters, and to leave like the social issues to 2 or 3, um,
Mm.
and but it also is a chance to introduce Black women to, like this, our small segment of society, introduce it to a larger segment of society who can become familiar and say, hey, I get hairs on my chin too. It's like, so I would talk about things like that, it's like, and to empower our humanity and for us to be seen as human, and not other, and that here we are, and this is what we go through. Oh, you recognize this? That's because we are human, and there is a human thread, and we all go through, like you said, insecurities and little spats with our girlfriends, and looking at what relationships should mean. Oh, you have to have a man, no, not necessarily. It's all that kind of stuff I could talk about, and talk about it truthfully, because it was coming from parts of me and what I experienced with other people.
Well, thank you so much for not only like coming to talk to us about this book, but for, bringing it to us. Like, it's the perfect moment for it. And it's so nice to get to look back at like such a really lovely and accomplished collection of work where you also get to see you like develop as an artist and a thinker over time, if that makes sense. Like it's just a really wonderful journey to go with you on. And, thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. Yay. I appreciate it. Absolutely.
All right, listeners. So where I'm coming from, as of the time that you hear this, is going to be available near you. So please pick it up at your nearest independent bookstore or library or wherever you like to go for your books. Thank you so much for joining us. It is time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.